Well,
Oh, sure.
learning as a schus for Shlema fi Lain Chaya Bas Serach. We are on Daf Nun Hey Amud Aleph. We're about to start the Mishnah all the way on the bottom of the Amud. So we're entering into a new realm. We just had some of you know that we just had a day of a little bit of Agadata as a little interlude, but now we're back into Avoda Zara Yayin Nesach. So the following Gemara is going to involve two things. First of all, it's going to involve the actual physical wine presses that they used to use. So I'll give you the basic layout of what a wine press looked like. I don't know if anyone has seen those videos of workers stomping on grapes in a big, huge thing.
Only in I Love Lucy, we remember it.
From Island Lucy. Dovi, you're aging yourself.
You remember it too.
Yeah, listen, I only when I was sick and I would go to my grandmother's house. That's the only, otherwise I never would know about it. But anyway, so that's what they would literally stamp on the grapes. That was in like a big area. They had a big trough that was full of grapes, and they would jump on them. And what would then happen is it would become a mixture of the leftover grapes and the liquid that came out of it. And then what they would do is then they would collect together all those solid stuff, and then they would have a beam that would press down of it and finish squeezing it out. And then there was some kind of cynurus, a tube that at the end of this trough, and it carried it off into a vat that collected it. At the end of that tube was what the Gemara, I forgot the word that the Gemara used, but it was essentially a strainer that would strain out again from it. And so that was the system for making wine, which will come up in the Mishnah right away. Now, that's one thing we have to have in mind. Another thing we have to have in mind is we're going to be talking about three separate categories of Isser or problems. One is what we're talking about, Yayin Nesach. We know Yayin Nesach is a problem generally because what we call Yayin Nesach is really Stam Yenam. Anything wine that belongs to a guy, if it's not Mavushal, we're worried about that the guy might have been Ovid at Lavai Zara. If he's Ovid the Yayin, it becomes Aser. Anything that a guy uses as a object of worship is also about. No, Yayin, there was a normal thing for them to use it as a takrevis to pour it out for the Avodah Zara. So anything that a guy owns, it's tam yenam, we're chayshish for yayin esach. And as we're going to see later on in the Gemara, the Chomu even geyser, if a guy touches yayin, it gets, even if he touches a yid's wine, that also has a din of stam yenam that will chayshish either because of chasnus or because of when he touches it, obviously there's no issue of that doesn't involve typically worship, but it is whatever. That's the problem of Yayin Nesach. That's one issue. Another issue that's going to come up very quickly is the issue of Tuma. A guy is always expected to be Tameh. And B'Shas of the Beis HaMikdash, the Chamu Geyser, that you're not allowed to be Matama things. You're not allowed to be Matama food. Because there were the Chaverim that were very makbid never to eat anything that was Tameh because of the times that they would eat Truma. So even something that was chulin, the chamu geyser that you're not allowed to be metama. So a guy is always assumed to be tameh. So a yid is not allowed to assist a guy in touching food because then he's going to be metama the food. That's a second category of iser. It's similar. Obviously, it sounds somewhat similar to yayin esach, but it's a different iser. The issue is being metama food, which to us sounds pretty harmless, sounds neutral. Something's other. Nowadays we don't have this problem. Everyone's tameh, and we're not chayshish for it. But during the times in Eretz Yisrael, when there was trumas and meisus, there was when they would separate trumas and people would remain tar. They try to the chamu guys are not to be mitam. And the third thing is the separation of trumas and meisus, which is somewhat closely related to the issue of yayin nesach, because yayin only becomes able to be yayin nesach once it's yayin. I was going to see it's a number of shittas about exactly what point in the production process of wine does it become wine that can have an isser of yayin nesach? They don't take raw grapes and they're not over that. The isser of yayin nesach, where we're chayshish that goyim are gonna use it for a sacrifice, for an offering to their idol worship, is only once it becomes wine, and that will impact in the din of trumas hamaisos. Like we've seen a number of times that different produce becomes huksher, that it has a din that you're not allowed to eat from it because it's now tevel, but that's only after a certain point in the production process of the different produce. For example, wheat, as we've seen a number of times, when you smooth out the pile, that's when it becomes really huksher, that it's now able to have trumas hamaisos taken off. Prior to that time, in deraisa, there's no chiyuv there's no isser to eat from it. The chacham geyser, you can only eat a temporary achila, but before it becomes a food, it's not. There's no issues of trumas hamaisos. It's not tevel, and this will impact, as we're going to see. The Gemara is going to make chalukim, but this is very similar to the din that was saying about yayin. That yayin, in order to have a din yayin nesach, has to be complete its process, and there's going to be a similar din l'gabi trumas hamaisos, that a food yayin has to be at the point of its process that it's considered wine in order for truma hamaiser to be applicable to it. Okay, with all those hakdamas, we could start the Mishnah. Start the Mishnah. Loichen gas beuta min ha'ovid kechavim. You can buy gases, the products of a wine press. Beuta, beita, we know, is kicking. So it means that you trampled on, like what you described. The first step of the process of making wine is you have people stamping on the grapes to get out the liquid. So if you take this product of the trampled on liquid from a guy, you could buy it from him. It's no problem. And that works even if the guy takes the leftover grapes after it was trampled and piles it up. So by piling it up, the weight of the pile squeezes out a little bit more. So he literally touched it with his hands. It's not, as we're going to see in the Gemara later on, there might be chalukim between his hand and his feet. Even so, the Mishnah says, it's not going to be aser al tziyai nesach because it's not yet wine. And the Mishnah continues, it doesn't become yayin nesach unless, as we described earlier, they trampled on the wine and the liquid flowed out and it went down the tube into the bar, into this vat that collected the wine. Zak the Mishnah, yard labar, once it goes down to the bar, that's already wine. Masher bar asur v'hashar mutter. What's in the bar is also, that's considered to be wine, but what's left behind, the liquid that's still in the original trough that they trampled on and in the tube leading to it, that's going to be mutter. That's not going to have a din wine, and therefore it's not going to have a din of yayin nesach. This is going to be a machlokes. There's going to be a number of shitas that disagree with this. And this is only, as we're going to see in the Gemara, Mishnah Rishona. There's going to be a second entire, this is just the Havamin of the Mishnah. The Tanakama will be Chayzer on this himself. Zak the Mishnah weiter. Darchen im ha'ovid kechavim begas. One can participate together with the Ovid Kechavim to stamp on the. This is before we were talking about Legabe taking the wine that had been touched by the Ovid Kechavim. Now we're talking about a Yid working together with the guy to make wine. Now, we just said that it's not considered wine in the gas when you're trampling on it. But now when we're talking about that second topic that we spoke about, the Isra of Tumah, of making Tumah, a guy is always considered to be Tameh. So when you work together with the guy, one might think there's a problem of making, that he's helping the guy, he's been causing the guy to make it Tameh. The Mishnah says no, it's not a problem, because as soon as we're talking about where the guy already started working, once the guy touched it, it's already Tameh. So your joining him is not making it any more Tameh. But you can't harvest the grapes prior to putting, even though that's early, so it's certainly not wine. But that when you do that, that's before the guy was already metamet. By harvesting and giving it to the guy that he's then going to go stamp on it, the guy is going to make it tameh. So therefore, you're being gairim, you're facilitating the guy is making it tameh. Yisrael shu oise b'tumah. This is all if a guy is working with the guy which we assume is always tameh. So that's the din by a guy. But Yisrael, if a Yisrael who's not careful, he's not careful about the din that you're not allowed to be metama chulin. A Yisrael shu oise b'tumah. He's tameh, and nevertheless he's still working with the grapes, and he's going to step on them. Loy darch, and not only can you not boitzer, loy darch and loy boitzer. You cannot even step on it with him, because in this case, even though it's already tameh from the yid, the owner who touched it, but it's not the same thing as by the guy, because over here it's specifically the din of Messiah. It's not just that you're guiding, that you're facilitating his making a tameh. You're assisting him in his bad actions. And there's more of a chumrah on yidden. When a yid is doing something that's aser, you're not allowed to help him at all. Whereas when we were talking about assisting a guy, once it became tameh, the guy didn't do anything wrong by making it tameh. The guy doesn't have any mitzvahs. It's not one of the seven mitzvahs b'nei noach, but he's not allowed to make it tameh. We're guys are that it becomes tameh. The yid guy didn't do anything wrong, so there's no misayel lidei over avera. But by a yid doing it, he's misayel lidei over avera. So not only can't he do it when harvesting, which is facilitating it, but even if it's after it was already done, since he's helping him, he's misayel lidei over avera. Even though we said you can't help a yid to harvest or to actually trample the grapes to produce the wine, but once it's made into the wine, he could bring a barrel to the wine press to put the wine into it, and he could carry the wine from it in a barrel. Because at that point, that's already a separate. It's a separate action. It's not directly related to the avera that the yid was doing. Helping him transport it afterwards is a separate thing. He's doing a separate thing. It's not considered misayel the avera. Just because someone did an avera doesn't mean you can never work with him ever again. You can help him do the avera, but you could do other things afterwards. Nachtam shu oise betuma. We're going to teach this like Taisus because this is the way I grew up teaching. A nachtam is a baker that makes bread betuma. Like we said, that's an usher. It's talking about a Yiddish baker. He's not allowed to do it. He's not allowed to make the flour tameh by mixing it with liquid. Things only become hochshel kabel when it gets mixed with liquid. So someone who bakes, who oise betuma, loy loshen v'loy archanima. You can't knead with him, and you can't braid it into the shapes. But after it's baked, you can bring it to the distributor to sell it, because that, like, it's similar to the chavis. That's already after he did his avera. Your action is not directly being gairim or misayel the avera. He already did his avera, and now you're allowed to continue associating with him and do work with him as long as it's not part of the avera. Amar Rav Huna. Back to the first din that we said in the Mishnah. We said that the liquid that is in the trough when an Ovid Kechavim is trampling on it, you're allowed to buy it from the Ovid Kechavim. It doesn't get a din of Yayin Nesach. Amravu Yayin Kivan Shehisril Hi Moshech also Yayin Nesach. He does not say like our Mishnah says. He says as soon as the wine starts to squeeze out of the pile of grapes because people are trampling on it, once it starts flowing away, it already becomes yayin, and it becomes yayin nesach, and it's aser. It's aser bahana. Our Mishnah said that you can buy from the Ovid Kechavim, even though the Ovid Kechavim, not only did the liquid come out, but he even took some of the leftover grapes, this crushed grapes, and he piled it up to cause more to come out. So you see that we're saying that in our Mishnah we said it's not also just because it started leaching away from the grapes. So how could Rav Huna pas say a din keneged the Mishnah? Rav Huna begas pekuka omaleya. Rav Huna says it depends. That which we say that it's mutter in our Mishnah is talking about whether it was that tube that would take the liquid out was stopped up. It was stopped up and it was full. The whole thing was full of grapes. So the liquid did not drain away from the grapes. It was full of grapes, and they trampled on it, so they got separated, but it didn't drain away from the body of the leftover grapes, so therefore it's not considered to be wine yet. Tashma, but the fact the Gemara ve'ein oisei yayin nesach hashiyerid lebar. Our Mishnah said specifically it doesn't become yayin nesach until it goes down to the vat, the collecting vat after the tube. But mashma that as long as it's before that, it doesn't become yayin nesach. It's not yayin. How could Rav Huna say as soon as it starts in the trough, the original trough, once it starts leaching away from the grapes, it's considered to be yayin? So no, when that was all talking about the Mishnah, it said that it doesn't become yayin nesach hachiyered labar. That means until you unstop the tube that brings the wine to this vat, it's not going to become yayin. That can become yayin nesach. Tashma, I'll bring you another raya. Yared labar, still from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah seemed to be very clear about this. Tashma, Yared labar, Masher bar also v'ashar mutar. Our Mishnah said clearly, when the liquid went down to the bar, what's in the bar is also because it's yayin, but what didn't go down to the bar, meaning still in the trough, even though it leaked away from the grapes, that's still mutar. So that sounds like our Mishnah holds that that even when it was moishech from the grapes, it's still going to be mutter. It's not considered wine. So Gemara concedes Amar Avuna like kasha. Kamba Mishnah Rishayna, Kamba Mishnah Achrayna. Eina Chanami. This Mishnah is not like what I said, but what I was saying was the Chachamim later were chayzer. The Tanakama of our Mishnah was chayzer. Originally he held that it's mutter as long as it didn't go down to the bar, but later he was chayzer and he said it becomes asur as soon as it was moishech from the grapes. The Tanya. V'rishainu hayu aimrim bedad. In the beginning, they said three halachas that were memorialized by the letters Beis Daled Daled, and the Gemara is going to explain them. And then we're going to say a Mishnah Achrayna, which says Devav, that says the halachas of Daled Beis Beis. And the first Mishnah says, like we have in our Mishnah, that it's going to be mutter, the wine that leaked out of the grapes, even before it gets to under the vat through the tube, is going to be mutter. But later on, they asked it. The Tanya. What's the days? One cannot harvest together with Ovid Kechavim into his wine press. Also, because like we said in the Mishnah, because of the problem of tumah, because the guy is automatically tamei, and you can't be geirim him to be matama the grapes. That's what our Mishnah said, that you can't harvest grapes, even though it's not yet wine, not because of not yayin nesach, because of the problem of tumah. Ve'ein darchem in Yisrael she'oisa peiroisa b'tumah. And the second din is you can't crush the grapes, trample the grapes with your feet with a yid that's making his peiros, and the yid is tamei. Like we said, you can't assist him to make over to do his avera, and certainly you're not going to be able to harvest, as the Mishnah Achrayna is going to say. You certainly can't help him by harvesting, because then you're being garim, you're facilitating. Without your harvesting, you wouldn't be able to. It's lifnei iver. I mean, it's not technically lifnei iver, but it's misayel l'dvei avera. You're directly helping him. Avol dorchem mo'evet kechavim bagas. But you can trample together with the Oivik Kechavim, which we didn't discuss that. We discussed harvesting with the Oivik Kechavim. Now we're saying, but you can trample together with the Oivik Kechavim in the wine press. And the Gemara comments, we're not chayish like Rav Huna, that as soon as the wine is moishech from the grapes, it has the din of yayin, it's over in yayin. So that's like our Mishnah, the Mishnah Rishona. And then they said a Mishnah Achrayna, and they changed these letters to Daled Veis Veis. So the Daled is Ein Darchem and Oivik Kechav Megas Mishum Rav Huna. They changed it in the Mishnah Achrayna. They said like Rav Huna, that once it's moishech from the grapes, it's considered to be yayin, and therefore it has a din yayin nesach, and it's awesome. The bases ve'ein boitzrim in Yisrael she'oitza peiroisa betuma. Secondly, you can't harvest together with the yid that does his peiros betuma. And certainly you can't jump on the grapes, you can't trample the grapes if you can't harvest the grapes because you're being Messiah Avera. When you're trampling it with him, you certainly actually that's when he's actually doing the Avera of making it tameh. Avol boitzrim ma'ovid kechavim begas, but you can harvest for an ovid kechavim grapes for his vineyard, for his vine, for his grape press. Shemutr lidgram tumah lechulim sheretz Yisrael. First of all, prior to it becoming wine, when you're harvesting, it's certainly not wine, so there's no issue of yayin esach. You're being geirim for the ovid kechavim to be metama. This Mandama says it's no problem to cause him to facilitate him being metama because it's chulin. The issue it's this Mandama holds that chulin is not as bad by Eved Kechavim. It's not. There's no din of separating trumas and maasros. So the takana was we don't want any chulin to become tameh because then you might come to be metama truma. But that would only apply by a yid who has a din that he has to separate the truma. But when you're going to a guy doesn't have a din of separating truma, so there's no potential truma in this chulin. So therefore, there's no problem of being gairim tuma for the chulin in Eretz Yisrael. So, but in any case, we see that there was a chazara between the Mishnah Rishayna and the Mishnah Acharona. The Mishnah Rishayna said that the wine that's meishach from the grapes is tar, and now we're saying you cannot collect. You can't. We said that you can't. Ein darchem ma'avikecham begas mishum deravuna. So the Gemara, ve'ein oisei yayin esachat yerid lebar. It does. Our Mishnah said that the wine doesn't become yayin esach until it goes to the bar. Now, going back now, after we hold this whole discussion of the Mishnah Acharona that the Rav Huna represents, now we're going back to the Mishnah Rishayna, which is what our Mishnah says, which is we said that when the wine is meishich from the grapes, it already gets a din yayin and it has an isser of yayin esach. So we said, the Mishnah continued and said, you don't make yayin esach until it goes down to the vat that it drains into. That wine only becomes wine of legabi yayin nesach when it reaches the stage of yakfa, which means that it I'm sorry, not that it becomes chashul yayin nesach. We're talking over here about legabi maasros. When is it considered yayin that it's completed, that the din of it has a din tevel, you have to separate trumas and maasros? That's only misha yakfa, when the wine reaches the point that the sediment is floating to the top. So that's a later point than when, like we said in the Mishnah, when it's first draining away from the grapes. This that we said over here, misha yakfa, that's Rabbi Kiva who holds the completion where the grapes turn into wine is when the sediment floats to the top, which is after it already went into the vat. We're going to see either the vat or into a barrel afterwards, but it's certainly later when you're meishach. So that's Rabbi Kiva harabanan. But our Mishnah is the rabbanan that in their Mishnah Rishonah they said it doesn't become yayin until that they say it becomes yayin when it's meishach away from the when it reaches the bar. The Tanan, Yain Mishiyar Labar, Rabbi Kiva Aimer Mishiyakva. The Tacham said Yain becomes Yain as soon as it reaches the bar, reaches the vat. Rabbi Kiva Aimer Mishiyakva, no, it's not enough when it reaches the bar. The sediment has to flow to the top. Ibailu, Kiva the bar, or Kiva the Chavis. When we said Rabbi Kiva says Mishiyakva, that it floats to the top, does that mean when it's in the bar, when it's in that vat, after it went through the tube? Or Kiva the Chavis, is it after it left that and it was even if the whole process was completed and was put into a barrel for storage, then it's still not yayin until the sediment floats to the top and is removed. Tashma, the Tanya, yayin mishayikva ava pisha kafa, yayin mishayikva. Yayin becomes yayin when you're able to take out. It becomes wine when you're able to take out the sediment floating on top. Ve'aval pisha kafa, and even though it floated at the top, koila min agas al yoina umeratzina v'shoisa. Even though the wine reached, obviously over here it's talking about reached the vat, and it floated to the top of the vat, you can still drink from what's in the upper gas, in the upper wine press, the trough where they trample the grapes, and from the tube that carries it from that trough to the vat. B'shoisa. Shmamina kifa debar karmina. Shmamina. So you see very clearly from this brisa that the floating is talking about not in the chavis that comes afterwards, but rather in the actual bar. In fact, the Mara that he says a brisa from Rav Zvid b'shem Rav Oishia that it becomes yayin when it goes down to the bar and it floats up. Rabbi Kiva says it's not when it floats to the top. He says a later time, not when it floats to the top of the bar, but rather when it's taken out and put into chavius. That's when it gets the din of yayin legabi my shumas amaishus. So the Gemara it's an amila kamaisa hachi yayin mishayeri lebar v'yikfa. We're gonna have to say taka that Rabbi Kiva doesn't hold it. It's when it's yerid lebar v'yikfa. That's the Tanakama holds when it goes down into the bar and it floats at the top. Rabbi Kiva aymer mishayashla b'chavius. Rabbi Kiva holds the next step. It has to be a step later when it's put into the barrels. So now we're saying that Machlekes Tanakama and Rabbi Kiva in that brisa is whether it's when the sediment floats to the top in the bar, which is in the second step, when it came after the vat, after it went through the tube. And Rabbi Kiva holds it's even later when it gets put into a barrel. So then our Mishnah that says it doesn't become yayin nesach until it goes down to the bar. But he says as soon as it gets to the bar, you don't need to wait that sheyikfa. Leimet tlosa tanoi, is it a three-way machlekes? So we have three shitas. So loy shani yayin nesach tachmiru beirabanan. The Gemara says einachanami, it's a chilik. Our Mishnah is talking about yayin nesach. So then they were machmir that it's even earlier. It gets to the yayin as soon as it gets to the bar. And so that's what. In that case, it could be both Rava and Rabbi Kiva. I'm not both Rava. I'm sorry, both the Tanakam and Rabbi Kiva. In our Mishnah, that's a different cheshbon. We're talking about yayin nesach. We're not talking about legabi chumas and ma'asus. So they generally machmer, as we've seen many times in Avoda Chavim. So they say it becomes yayin, has a din yayin as soon as it reaches the bar. Sagt Gemara ula Rava. Rava didn't want to answer originally the brisa this way. The loy shani lay. He's not mechalik between the isser of yayin nesach and the legabi the din when it becomes yayin for yayin nesach, when it becomes yayin for chumas and ma'asos. Mukim lei ketlasa tanoi. According to him, you're not going to have to say it's a three-way machlekes. Sagt Gemara. Masher bebar aser v'ashar muter. We said once the wine goes down into the lower vat, so that becomes a din yayin, and it's also yayin. That's again still the Mishnah Rishayna. V'ashar muter, but what's left behind in the trough and in the sinairis in the tube is muter. Rav Huna. So Rav Huna is now explaining this. Rav Huna, we said before, said the Mishnah Achroina, that he said that it's going to be aser right away. But now Rav Huna is going in a different, putting on a different hat. Now he's explaining the Mishnah Rishayna. He says this din that we said that Masher Babar aser v'ashar muter lo shanu shlei hichzer gar gusni legas. That's only as talking as long as you didn't take they like I said, they had this tube that had a sieve to strain out any of the grape pieces before it went into the lower vat. So this is all talking about that what's inside the top vat, the trough, is mutter, as long as you didn't take what was caught in that strainer, in that sieve, and return it to the upper trough. But if you take what was caught in that sieve and return it with the rest of the refuse that you're then going to press to get out more wine, aser. It's aser. Because we say what was in the strainer is itself aser. In fact, the Gemara Galusni Gufa b'mai kamitzra. was saying that that little bit that was in the strainer asers everything on top. Why does what's in the strainer aser? So L'chayra, you're saying it's because what's in the strainer then the liquid goes out of that strainer and goes down into the lower trough. What's in the lower trough, we said, has a din yayin, and it's yayin esach because it's touched by the guy. So what's in the strainer has a din nitzuk that it's touching, the stream is touching what's on top of it. Since it streams into the yayin esach, it's connected through that streaming wine. So Shmami no nitzuk chibur. L'chayra, this would be a raya that nitzuk is a chibur, and this is a question, some achloikas later on. So why don't we bring this as a raya that when something is streaming, a stream of liquid is considered to be mechuber, and it gets the same isser. So Gemara Kantanu Reb Chia shepechsasait sluchaisiyai. Reb Chia says that in the gabi when you use a funnel to pour wine into an ovid kechavim's kais. So we say it touches what was in the Ivy Kechavim's kais, and then it makes a little bit of usher liquid in the funnel. Then when you use that funnel for a year, it also asks what he has. So we said, but I see, we want to bring a raya from there, Lagabi Nitzuk, that you see that streaming is us. So we said, no, it's talking about over there where the liquid backed up when it went actually into the funnel. So Haganami Shepechsasai Boirei. We're talking over here also where there was so much liquid in the bar that it backed up and it touched what was in the strainer directly. It wasn't through a stream of liquid falling down, but it was touching directly. Hayu Yanuka, the Tanavid's Gechav Meshish Shani. There was a certain kid who learned Avoda Zara, Masechtas Avoda Zara, when he was 6 years old. Bo Minei Mahu Lidroichem Ovid Gechav Magas. They asked him, what's the din to go work with the Ovid Kechavim in the gas, in the olive press, which is the din that we've been talking about. We said that it's mutter because it already becomes tummy as soon as the Ovid Kechavim touched it. And like we said in the Mishnah Rishayna, there's no problem. That we're not worried about yayin nesach. So, but we said the Mishnah that it's aser. Amalahu darchan Ovid Kechavim begas. He said that no, you could do it. But we said in the Mishnah Achrayna that if he touches it, it causes it to become yayin nesach. So Gemara did we're talking about where he tied up his hands, the hands of the guy, so he doesn't touch it with his hands. So therefore, it doesn't become yayin nesach. He's not touching it. Why are we worried that he's touching with his feet and that's making it stam yenim or yayin nesach? The chomel goes that if you touch it, it's aser. So touching with his feet is not considered yayin nesach because a person does not. That's not the way goyim were ovid the avodah zara by doing an offering with their feet. So therefore, there's no chash that moving it is going to be causing it to have a din of yayin nesach. Hahu ovda the havban ardoi. There was this case in Ardoi, the Dashu Yisrael v'Ovid Kechavim lahu chamra, that a yid and a guy were trampling on the wine. V'shaya Shmuel tlasa rigli. Shmuel waited 3 regalim to try to figure out how to paskin in this case. So it was yayin that belonged to a yid. So we're chayshes legabe. So we're going to see. We're not worried about. We're not worried about. We're talking about where his hands were tied. So we're not worried about yayin nesach that he actually was menasach the one. So the question is, what was the issue that he tried to clarify? So why do you wait? My time. What was he waiting for? If maybe he wanted to wait because he wanted to see if we pass on like Reb Nosson, who we're about to explain, that Reb Nosson holds such yayin is asr. That he holds the asr afilu bahana, the Tanya. Where do we see that? Madadu. If they measure the wine by sticking his hand or his regal in to see how high up it was. Well, the guy did it bein biyad, bein regal, whether with his hand or with his foot. You could sell it because measuring it is not worshipping it. So it's only Chacham only asered it b'shtiya, but they didn't aser it b'hana. Rav Nosson biyad aser. Rav Nosson said no, it's going to be aser even b'hana if he did it b'hand, because the Chacham made a bigger gzeira on the hands since it's possible to be ovid with the hand. The regal mutter, but if he does the regal, then it's mutter b'hana, even though it's also to drink. So if he's saying that's what he was waiting for, we're talking about trampling on the grapes. That's talking about beregel. So Rav Nosson only asked bahano when he did it he measured with his hands. Ella, so why did he wait? He was waiting for a tana that matzahs like Rav Shimon. Deshraya afilu b'shtia, because if you find someone who passes like Rav Shimon, who we're going to see later on in a couple of blot, he says it's mutter even to drink when it was touched. So then I wanted to be able to be matter it afilu b'shtia. Okay, we're going to stop over here. So we'll continue tomorrow at 10 to 8.
Thank you so much.
Have a good tvach. Good to see everyone.